Welcome to the
You know what I mean?
special board meeting on September, is it September the 2nd? Middle Park Foundation District. Roll call.
Director Solano.
Here.
Director Ianson.
Here.
Director Crowley. Here. Director Carpenter.
Here.
Director Bernstein.
Present.
And we have a quorum.
Okay, public comment number 2. All right, very good. That takes us to, you know what's not on here is the Pledge of Allegiance.
Special meeting.
Special, oh, you're going to do this. All right.
Sorry.
Yeah, you know, I'm always for that. That's all right.
Sing the
Okay.
Star Spangled Banner.
That brings us to the regular agenda. And the first item is the accept the treasurer's report for the month ending June 30th, 2014. Any questions on, yes?
Yeah, I would just like to thank Director Bernstein for having put forward the questions that he has. I think it's incredibly helpful. If any of us have questions, to try to get those on the record ahead of time, give the staff the opportunity to respond. Much better way for us to use our time. So thank you for asking the questions, and staff, thank you for your answers that were provided to those questions.
So, Bernstein, did you get the answers to your questions?
Yes, yes.
To your satisfaction?
Well, I will voice a general dissatisfaction that won't be answered in one meeting. But I think the financial reports are very difficult to understand. And as a result, I don't think they're very useful. And I'd like to see them be more useful. I made some suggestions. It's not going to happen tonight. I'm not going to belabor the point. I just think that these reports exist for a purpose, which is to tell people about the financial status of the agency. And when we spend a lot of time putting some money in this pocket, some money in this pocket, then we better take it out of this pocket, move it over to this pocket. When we get all done, it's like this little shell game. Where's all the money? I don't know. It's under all the shells. You know, somehow we don't really know where we are very well. And I would say I'm good at doing this stuff. I have a degree in doing this stuff. I worked for 10 years as a consultant doing this stuff, and I have trouble understanding it, and it just shouldn't be that way. So I'd like to see us make improvements, and I think in fairness to the accounting group and FARIBA specifically, I think these things probably are done according to government accounting standards. But that doesn't make them clear and easy to read, and I don't think government standards, we certainly wouldn't run our lives according to government standards. So why would we necessarily do financial reports according, sort of over-reliance on them? I'd really like to see some improvement in all this, particularly the difference between operating funds and capital funds. And this idea of we spend it for equipment, but it's out of the operating budget, but here's the capital. I bet there's not one person here, or maybe even in this whole room, that understands how these monies are moving in and out and what any of that means. So I just think we can do better. I'd like to challenge us to do better, and I hope we will in the future. That's all I'm saying.
Picking up on that, we discussed earlier going to a new structure, new chart of accounts. We had circulated the one that the state of New York uses. I don't know whether you had a chance to look at that and see whether or not that begins to respond to some of your concerns and questions. With respect to complying with the GASB standards, it's not an option. We have to do that. Whether we do things in addition to that or not is another question. But that's the bare minimum. We don't have the choice of saying we're not going to comply with those standards. Those are ones that we are required to comply with. And I think that the advantage of something like the New York State system is it was designed with those standards in mind. And I would appreciate, as we move forward, sort of you looking at that and saying, yes, this answers my questions, or no, it doesn't, and let's talk about why it doesn't. Because from my standpoint, that's the default. I agree what we have now is unduly complicated. And I would like us to move to something that is more straightforward, but it still has to comply with the GASB standards. And so that's the balance that we have to achieve.
Anybody else? I guess my question to Freeman is, can we move to a simpler system that is GASB compliant?
Okay, so here is one thing that, if I may add, is that I do respect that Director Bernstein has done this for so many number of years, but there's a fine line between FASB and GASB. And learning the difference between them, as you all mentioned, it's not going to happen over an hour. There are documents that Director Carpenter has sent me, and I forwarded to everyone. And I forwarded some documents, and I hope everyone gets to read them. There's a great, in detail explanation of the difference between why we do things this way and why corporations do their accounting that way. We have two sets of financial statements that we need to worry about. One is at the fund level, which, you know, in every report I've said there's a measurement focus, which is current fiscal year. When we're talking about measurement focus, is the current fiscal year. That's considered fund accounting or governmental fund accounting. And then the other one is the other set of financial statements that looks at the government as a whole, and that's where we call it government-wide. So in order for us to talk about budget, we need to focus on the governmental accounting, you know, that fund accounting. So to make it any easier than this is, really, I really don't think we can do it any easier, make it any easier without losing transparency, because GASB emphasizes on having different type of funds in order to achieve the transparency. So when we have CIP, the CIP fund, for the district has been always looking at the cost of replacement of stations, construction and replacement of stations. So when your taxpayers look at your audit reports, they can see how much money have you spent for construction, and no other information is involved. And when they look at your debt service fund, they see how much interest payment are you making. And when they look at your general fund, they can see what ongoing operating expenses were. So we used to have internal service funds. That's where we used to book or record our equipment. But for the sake of simplicity, we took that away and we said, for the fire district, it really doesn't make sense to have internal service fund because we provide one service. We all as a whole, we provide one service. So it didn't make sense. You know, there was a white paper that said, for the simplicity, you should combine it. So we did that. And that's where all these reports, they're showing the internal service funds and general fund, you know, operating expenses and your equipment costs, you know, fixed asset and wages and benefit are all combined in one fund type. But we also have set aside reserves. And that's, again, when we talk about reserves, we're talking about that measurement focus of one fiscal year. We're talking about governmental funds, and we're not talking about the big picture. So when we have set aside funds in reserves, so when we have emergencies, you know, apparatus breaks down, we need to spend $1.5 million to go purchase an apparatus. We have that fund, those funds set aside. So the response would be, I believe we are doing it as simple as it's possible. We only have 3 funds because, you know, considering FEMA funds, we only have 4 funds. So we are doing as simple as it gets. Now, question would be, understanding of governmental accounting. And I'm always available to answer questions if you need workshops or want to stop by. We can go to the fundamental of governmental accounting, which is completely different from corporate accounting. Because again, we have two sets of financial statements that we look at. And best way to get familiar, to get to know our accounting is really to look at our CAFR, to read through it. And you can see that some of my reports matches the CAFR, what our auditors provide us. And what they provide, it absolutely matches what GASB recommends and is stated in the textbooks. So, and they did not create anything new because they have to follow the standards.
Any questions? Comments? Okay, that brings us to item number 2. Accept the 2013-14 year-end budget review and adopt a resolution.
Director, I can just get a motion to accept the report for.
So moved.
Oh,
I'll
Second.
Thank you.
those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 2, accept the 2013-2014 year-end budget review.
I'll move to accept.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in
Well,
favor?
Aye.
I just wanted to say something about this. I don't know. I don't feel comfortable with it. I think it's odd to adjust your budget after you know what your actuals are, just before you give everything to the auditor. It's just incomprehensible behavior, in my opinion. So I'm going to vote against it because I just think it's bad policy, it's bad procedure, and I just think it's totally unnecessary. You have a budget, you have an actual, and you compare the two, but you don't adjust the budget so it looks like you're year-end, and you say, aha, we made it. Somehow it just doesn't make sense to me.
Peter?
Yeah, I have a different sense of that from both my fire service experience here and my private sector experience. In my private sector experience, we began the year with a budget, and it was a very entrepreneurial company, and we would probably revise our budget weekly. And we would cancel one project and start another project. And the budget at the end of the year bore relatively little relationship to the budget at the beginning of the year, but the budget at the end of the year was the consequence of 10 or 15 iterations. At each point in time, we said, okay, going into this meeting on Tuesday, we had a budget that was effective as of yesterday, and we now want to cancel this project and start this project. And so we then had a second budget, and by the time we got to the end of the year, we probably went through 20 different budgets. So I'm not at all uncomfortable with revising our budget when something changes and the staff comes to us and says, we think you should make a change in the budget. That's very different than, say, the federal government, where the budget's proposed by the executive branch, goes to the legislative branch and is approved, and then that budget essentially stays intact, and you work against that budget. So I don't see budget revisions as being something which is inappropriate or deceitful or it's just the way we do business.
The difference here, Peter, is you're talking, and I agree with what you're talking about is a reasonable procedure. I mean, many organizations actually have 3 different things. They have their original budget, then they have their different names for it. Some people call them forecasts, some people call them estimates, but they're revised to take care of current situation. And you should do that. That's appropriate. And then the year is over. At this point, though, the money's been spent. It's all done. Revising the budget doesn't authorize people to do anything differently. It's not like you're gonna start a new project or end a project. All it's gonna do is make it look like your budget came in to your actual. It just serves a little purpose, is all I'm saying. So,
Staff has
Go ahead.
In our CAFR, if you look at our CAFR, there's a section on the budget that it shows the original and the revised. And that's GASB 34 requirement, that you have to show your readers original and modified. And also, all these reports that we write, it's a public document. So all your taxpayers, right now they know exactly what our budget difference is. Those readers who are interested to know how did we do these modifications, they're all part of public records. So, and also when we publish our CAFR, we're not hiding anything. We show, here was our original, which is what was approved before the fiscal year started, and this is what we modified to. So they're not, you don't lose transparency, we don't lose documents, it's all of these are part of our records and history.
could I just ask the question? Since it's all done, you've got those things right now, why are we bothering to adjust the budget at this point? What does that serve?
Well, the same way that we adjust the budget at the mid-year, and as Director Carpenter mentioned, some agencies do this on a monthly basis until they get to the year end. But unfortunately, because I'm the only person doing this, we just meet once after mid-year and once at the year end. I report to you, I write a report that provides you the picture of the budget performance. What have we done for the fiscal year? At that point, then we, it has been traditionally here, we have changed the budget at the end of fiscal year. But if I would have been coming to you every month, we would have been changing it every month, and then at the very last month, we would have had the budget that matched actuals.
Okay, well, I guess, I'm just making the point that at mid-year, oftentimes budgets are authorizing documents, spend up to the budgeted amount or something of that sort. And so you revise the budget because you're revising the authorization. Once the year is over, there's no more money to be spent in the year.
Yes, there is money. Actually, on this report, in this report, page 5 is allocating what's left, the difference between the revenues that you expected, but you see more than your expectation, and then the expenditures that you didn't spend, there is money left on the table. And the suggestion, the staff recommendation is to fund the replacement of Station 6, putting aside funds for PERS, carrying forward those open purchase orders. If we don't do these things, the station replacement won't be funded. We will not be able to put aside funds in the reserve, in the PERS reserve, and we cannot carry forward the open purchase orders, nor we can make a budget adjustment for chief approved expenditures for next fiscal year. So it's important that we come back here at the end of fiscal year, same manner as we came back mid-year, and ask for budget adjustment and ask for permission to make transfers and carry forward.
I don't mean to belabor the point. I just don't think it's good procedure. I don't think it's necessary. I like it where they say, here's the pot of money we got left, the end. And I think the stations ought to be funded, but I don't think this is the way to fund the stations. That's all I'm saying.
But that's the only way we fund the stations. I mean, how else can we transfer if there is no money? If we don't allocate the residuals, then because the CIP funds Their only source of fund is the general fund.
Rex? Can I suggest that Chuck Reba and the chief meet
No,
and try to, present your ideas to them, Chuck? And
But
it appears to be like a,
Yeah, and I'm sorry to take the time
No,
up here. We don't
no,
have
I
to, we really don't need to belabor this. I think
meet with the.
they've got a way of doing it. I think they need to continue doing it the way they do it. I just don't think it's a good way. I'm gonna vote against it, and but I appreciate what you're saying.
No, I'm just saying that.
I don't think they want me to
Chief's
get
a pretty
involved in their
amenable guy.
business.
I mean, he'll meet with you, and Reba, she's great, and, I'm sure that things will.
I think a lot of time and effort's gone into not only your questions, but the
That's
answers.
great.
And I think that's very beneficial.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
On page 5, when you have to allocate the 4.9-ish million,
Yes.
number 1 is it's the 2.335 million for the replacement of Station 6. Is that the money that's already been committed in the 13-14 budget, and we're just putting that in there? This is not new money, because I thought this board.
No, this
decided-
is just the residual in general fund. So if we transfer what's left in general fund into this replacement of the Station 6, then we have fully funded the Station 6. So if we look at our balance sheet as of now, we will see that it's fully funded.
Okay, so I was a little confused, because I thought we were not gonna move forward with any new funding for Station 6 and only continue funding what we've committed to fund. Am I lost on that?
No, you're talking now, again, this difference between funding and expenditure.
Okay, okay.
This is, to use Chuck's expression, this is taking some money and putting it in this pocket over
Right.
here. It's not authorizing you to spend the money in that pocket.
Got it.
It's putting the money in the pocket.
Right.
It's like
I
putting
get
it
it,
into
but-
savings account and
No,
use
I
it
get it,
later.
but I thought we were not even gonna do that, but okay. I mean, I'm fine.
No, because remember, we have recategorized the Station 6 project to not being site-specific.
Right,
We still have a responsibility as an institution
right.
to serve the downtown area. We still have a responsibility to replace that station. Whether we will replace it in its current location or not
Is another issue.
is to be decided.
Right, okay, I just wanted to be clear. Okay.
Any other questions? I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
All right, okay.
Okay. Four are for it and one is opposed. Okay, that brings us to the third item on our agenda. Consider adopt a resolution authorizing the fire chief to execute the sole source contract for fire alert system. I'm gonna read the whole thing.
So moved.
So moved.
Second?
Second, discussion. You want to handle, is there any discussion on this?
And we've been dealing with TSA for quite a while,
Yep, TEA,
TEA.
TEA, I'm sorry.
and in the Net 6 JPA.
Chuck, you have some questions on your sheet?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes basically back to the accounting issues. I think the idea is a good idea, but I can't make heads or tails of where the money's coming from, where it's going. I think it seems to be operating funds, but it ought to be capital funds. And I just think I'm going to vote no because, again, I think the form of it is just something that leads to loss of control in terms of the organization. But
Outside.
I'm for the project.
Or is it fair to say that when we do something like this, we are making an expenditure, and that's an operating activity? The source, where the money comes from, then says which fund do you take it out of? And so those are two basically separate transactions. To use your analogy, we have a number of bank accounts, and something comes up and we authorize the expenditure of X number of dollars. And then in addition to authorizing the expenditure, the decision has to be made to say, okay, which of the funds that we have does this money, does it just money for this expenditure come from. Is that a fair way to describe
Yes, yes.
transactions?
Yes, you're correct.
Any further discussion? Okay, those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. For our fourth, one is against. Last item on our agenda is request from Director Swano to have a discussion on the Station 2 plaque.
I will be fast. I know from the chief's email that there were a series of sitting boards that were involved. And as I stated to the chief, I've seen it where that individuals were mentioned as to their tenure of the board or their tenure as being an elected official. They were put there. And I've also seen where just the sitting board is on the particular station. So I just wanted to make it a discussion item to see what everyone else thought.
How many names you talking about?
Well, you have one of the former board members sitting here. You probably have about 4 other board members that I can think of that would not be listed, excuse me, on that plaque if it just had the current seated board. But remember, there's been a multi-phase project over years, so even the dedication of the rear lot and the antenna and all the project area back there was done in a phase. So Jack was there, for example, for that, but he would not be on the plaque if you didn't include all the board members during the 7 to 9 years that this project was in play.
So
It's your call.
So we're looking at what, 7, 8 people?
Yeah.
Anybody have a heartache with that?
Not at all.
Except maybe Peter's name will be on there 3 times. Just kidding.
We won't, yeah, we won't-
Rex will be on there 3 times.
We won't duplicate names.
You would duplicate, okay.
I
As long as you don't
have an
duplicate
issue with
names.
that. I think it's just silly. I mean, I think, I don't see why any of the board members' names should be on a plaque for a fire station. I mean, you should have the fire chief, and that's all, that all needs to be there. It doesn't have to be the board. And the fact is, the people who maybe collected the money for it could have been here 20 years ago or something. I mean, how do you sit there and figure out who to recognize on a plaque and what's fair and reasonable? And I just think it gets to be silly, and there's just no reason for anybody's name to be on it.
Well, it's customary for public facilities such as this to have the elected officials who are responsible for that physical facility listed on it, and it's not unusual. It may be silly, but it's not unusual.
But it's silly to try to get everybody on it. If you look at the Golden Gate Bridge, it took 10 or 15 years to build it. Doesn't have all those people, it just has the people of the dedication. I mean, I just,
Well, I think that's a fact to be ascertained. I don't know that every plaque that I've ever seen only had the people on it who were sitting at the time the plaque was forged. I think it's within the discretion of this board to decide whose name go there. And I certainly am deferential to the work that Jack and Stephen Nachtheim and Art Spencer and other people, a lot of people contributed to that. Let's assume that it was, the plaque is put up one day after the next election. Do the people who've never done anything before except be there be on that plaque? I think that's not appropriate. So I'm inclined to include the names of all the directors who were involved in this particular project. And if there's some huge ambiguity about that, then we can discuss it further. But from what the chief has said, it's a finite number of people. If one wanted to be precise, you could in fact list the years during which they served. But I think that's just extra cost to do that engraving or stuff. And I certainly don't think my name needs to appear there more than once.
Just want you to one time.
So what I would like to do is that I would entertain a motion to include the people who were on the plaque that were involved in the project.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Okay. that's it. We're ready for public comment number 3. Does anybody have one? Is there anybody?
Motion to adjourn?
I have a motion and a second. Those in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. All right.
Thank God.
Little stars, you know,
What item